All right, looks like we're all ready to go. We're doing a little two-part series that starts tonight. It's titled Tell It Slant. I Want My Father Dead and Other Stories of Jesus That You've Forgotten. Maybe our communications people edited out Jesus so it didn't seem so offensive, but I wanted it to be offensive. It was meant to sound kind of provocative. What story do you think of Jesus might be titled, I Want My Father Dead? Anybody have a guess? Somebody guessed the Good Samaritan last week. It's not the Good Samaritan, although we're going to look at the Good Samaritan tonight. Judy, you had a guess. The prodigal son, very good. And it says, I want my father dead, because the prodigal son basically goes to his dad and says, I want my inheritance now. So he's basically saying, I wish you were dead so I could get your money. We'll get more into that later. And I got different titles for all the different or titles I've gotten from other folks that we'll use tonight. Anyway, so it's from this book by Eugene Peterson, Tell It Slant. I'll say a little bit more about the title, what that means. Eugene Peterson is in the resurrection now, a fabulous scholar. He did his own translation of the entire Bible. He's fluent in biblical Hebrew and biblical Greek. I should say he was. Anybody read The Message? Anybody ever seen The Message? Some of you have. It's a great translation. I don't always agree with his point of view, but it's a great way to hear it, as I was saying earlier, in sort of a language that sounds like the way we talk, at least the way we talked 25 years ago when he had it first published. So I'm using this book as the primary text. We're going to look at two stories tonight. We're going to look at the prodigal son, and we're also going to look at the Good Samaritan, which I've got a different title for that one as well. And I really like this idea of telling it slant. Let me just tell you a little bit about what that means. Rather than just taking on truth directly, sometimes it's easier to hear it come in the side door. You know, I mean, if you walk up to somebody and go, you're a jerk, well, it might be true, but if there's a way for you to gently, through a story perhaps, help them see something about themselves, that's going to be much more powerful than you just coming in and pointing a finger and saying you. In fact, in our premarital work that we do, we talk about I language versus you language. When I say to Julie, you this or you that, I'm putting all of it off on her. If I say I have a concern about this, or I don't have any concerns about Julie, but just on those rare occasions when we have loud conversations, we both work pretty hard at trying to use that kind of I language. I'm concerned about this, or I'd like to share this, etc. But even more than that, there's a way to communicate truth that can allow the person you want that to hear it, to discover it. One of the best parables in the entire Bible is in the second book of Samuel. Do you know this story? Once there was a man who owned 10,000 sheep. Have you heard this one? There was a man who owned 10,000 sheep, but he came upon a very poor shepherd who had one ewe lamb, and that one lamb was his whole life. He loved that lamb. He cared for it, but much like we love our dogs, he loved that lamb. But this man with 10,000 sheep, he wanted it for himself. And so you know what he did? He killed the owner of that lamb and took it for himself. Now, the person who tells that story is the prophet Nathan. He's telling it to King David. And King David says, bring that man to me. And what does Nathan say? It's you. In the King James, it's better. Thou art the man. Now, look at how that happened. David has already been prosecutor and judge. Bring that man to me, because he can, in the old law, put the man to death. David has already convicted himself. King David has already convicted himself. But also look at how courageous Nathan is. Because if you don't like your advisors and you're the king, what do? I mean, these days you kill them. I'm sorry, these days, erase that. These days, you fire them and send them away. But in David's day, he could just have him killed. And maybe even publicly in a humiliating and degrading kind of way. But the story is so powerful, he tells it slant, where David's able to hear it, which is one of the reasons why preachers like me and the preachers on our staff and lots of other preachers I'm sure many of you know, use so many stories because so many times the stories really are the point. So that's a great old parable from the Old Testament. I had a minor in speech in college, and my speech professor was a man named Lee Lane. His one and only book that he wrote was titled "By All Means Communicate." It was a really pretty good book written back in the early 1980s. Dr. Lane used to have us use what he called the indirect approach, which is kind of the same idea. Don't start with, "I'm here to talk to you about." One of my speeches, by the way, was on nuclear weapons and the proliferation of them, and that was a really scary thing back in the 80s. Feels a little scary again these days, but I gave this speech on how we should be cutting back and making treaties, whatever. But what Dr. Lane wanted us to do was not start with the point. Today I'm going to give a speech on nuclear reduction of nuclear weapons, and here's why I think we should do it, and here's 3 points I'm going to make, and now let's get to those points. Instead, start indirectly and get into it from a different, I don't remember what I did in that speech, but get into it from a different angle so that then people are opened up by the story itself. One of the things that Peterson says in his book, Tell It Slant, is that the language we use about God is the same language we use about people. And what Jesus, in Peterson's view, and I would agree with this, what Jesus is brilliant at doing is using that language about us and telling stories about regular people that connect us then to how Jesus especially understood God's self and how God interacts with us. Peterson also says, and this might sound actually kind of controversial, but I'm going to quote him so I can't get in trouble. He says what we need more of, for example, if you want to learn about prayer, are fewer prayer workshops and more conversations with people who actually pray. Isn't that a fascinating idea? You know, rather than here's 4 things on how to have a happy prayer life or a solid prayer life or whatever, which I've read articles like that and they're fine. What Peterson suggests is be around people who you know are invested in their lives in prayer and get into conversations with them and listen to them tell stories. I was on retreat about, how old am I? What year is this? About 14 years ago in Arizona with a group of guys. We call ourselves the Desert Brothers, a bunch of pastors from churches like this one from around. In fact, back then, Dick Wing, who was here, was a part of that retreat as well. And what we do is we check in Arizona, we have dinner together the night before, and then over the next 2 or 3 days, we each take a couple of hours to talk about where we are in our ministry, where we are in our lives, what spiritual issues we might have, that sort of thing. It's a really great place to be open and safe and speak from the heart. And I was dealing with some stuff at the church I was in at that time. And one of the guys, his name's Eric Elness, great pastor. He's now out in Eugene, Oregon. Eric just looks at, and we're supposed to, this is part of the deal, so it's not like don't, yes, hey, Steve and Rachel, you guys should check out Eric's church next time you're out there. I saw you talking about Eugene, Oregon, yes. They have grandbabies out there, I think grandkids, right, in Eugene. Anyway, Eric, we challenge each other, or we speak the truth to each other in love, as the cliche goes, and Eric just looks at me and goes, tell me about your prayer life. And I went, why? Because I'm wondering if you pray for your people. I started to cry. I'm getting emotional just even thinking about that moment because I hadn't been in prayer. My prayer life had been checked to the side. The other person who's really good at this, by the way, is Julie. She can be like, are you getting your quiet time in? Because you're being kind of a jerk. Eric, like Julie, was challenging me. And he just said, you know, I hear a lot of stuff and descriptions about things and meetings and bylaws and all that. When was the last time you prayed for your people? And he wasn't being self-righteous. He was just using the language about us that we could hear. And by him starting with that, with my prayer life, as opposed to delineating all the things I was naming that we needed to pay attention to my church and needs to be blah, 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 whatever, he came in from an indirect approach. He told it slant. Okay, here's next slide. Here's where Eugene Peterson gets the title from. This is a poem by Emily Dickinson. Tell all the truth, but tell it slant. Success in circuit lies, too bright for our infirm delight, the truth's superb surprise. As lightning to the children eased with explanation kind, the truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind. That's pretty good, isn't it? That was really good. I just love, I mean, we can excuse the male language. I'm sure she would be more inclusive now, but you get the point that she's making there. Next slide. This is from early in Peterson's book, Tell It Slant. Jesus' parables are informal, conversational, give and take stories. Give and take stories told while eating meals with friends, walking on roads between villages, or in response to interruptions by questions on the road to somewhere or other. Don't raise your hand, but how many of you have found yourself having what ended up being very sacred conversations, and they weren't in church? At a table, over coffee, maybe in an airplane, and you're sitting next to each other for 6 hours on the flight over to London or Scotland or something. Think of all those sacred, holy moments you've had, and how many of them weren't in church. Hopefully some are in church. Hopefully that happens along the way. For me, in fact, I sent a note to Andy Blosser, our director of music, Amy Blosser, who directs our music at South, and Janelle, who leads our 9 o'clock band here at Winggrace Hall. I sent a note to them on Sunday and said, I'm usually so dialed in on the sermon, I don't really experience worship. I shouldn't confess that to members of the church, but I'm so dialed in on it. I just, I hardly even notice what's going on. But the note I sent to them Sunday afternoon was, except you guys pull me in every week. I mean, they really do by the power of the music. Hopefully you've had some sacred moments like that. But in my life, most of the time, sometimes it's in church, but most of the time it happens over a cup of coffee or a glass of wine or just an ad hoc phone call that comes out of nowhere. And that's what Peterson wants us to see about Jesus. Okay, next slide. So what we're going to do in this series is in this tonight and then next week, we're going to look at 2 of Jesus' parables from the Gospel of Luke, and then 2 more next week. I'll tell you what those are at the end. It's called the travel narrative. It's when Jesus has been out preaching early in the Gospel of Luke. He's recruited all of his disciples. He's got about 70 or so that he's recruited to. So he's going to send them out in 36 pairs to preach and teach and share the good news about the kingdom of God is at hand. And I think it's in Luke 9:51. Yes, in Luke 9:51, where Jesus is like, okay, I got everybody ready. We're ready to go. And Luke says Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem. So the travel narrative is from the north in Galilee through Samaria. So many of the stories that are being told while they're traveling through Samaria. You're all good Bible folks. You know Samaria is where the Samaritans are from, and the Jews and the Samaritans don't get along. To say they were vicious, violent enemies is a little bit overstated. There was violence here and there occasionally over decades. There might be some violent thing happen 20 years or 30 years apart. But mostly they just couldn't stand each other. It was a little more than Michigan versus Ohio State. It was more than that. I know that's hard to believe for some of you, but it was certainly more than that. But they don't really get along each other. So here's what Peterson does to help us understand this. The travel narrative has Jesus speaking in informal, non-structured language, much of it not explicitly religious, in the course of relaxed and spontaneous incidents that occur on the way. In fact, we'll look at one of those here in just a moment. Before I go on, is that making sense? Give me some nods or yes, you're with me here. Any questions for clarification that you might have? Yes, please. Tell it slant. In other words, rather than telling the truth like from the top down, Margaret, you need to know these 4 things. Come at it from an angle, maybe with a story that helps to open up what the truth might be. Does that help? Yeah. Good. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Well, let's get into it. You've got the story on your table. Find story number 1, Luke 10, 25 through 37. Go to the next slide, by the way. Yeah. Here's the title I've given this one: The Story of Christ in the Ditch. I talked about the Good Samaritan. I preached on the Good Samaritan several years ago, and in that sermon, I said I love something that my friend, Father Robert Capon, says about the story of the Good Samaritan. That the Christ figure in the story is the man who's been beaten up and left for dead. That's Jesus. It's Jesus in the ditch. So that's the title that I borrowed from my friend Robert Capon, who everyone I know and like them are all with Jesus now. He wrote a bunch of books. One of them is Parables of Grace, where he deals with mostly parables from the Gospel of Luke. All right, I'll read the story. An expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You've given the right answer. Do this and you will live." But wanting to vindicate himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" I'm going to pause there for a moment. It's kind of funny. Capon, and I agree with Capon, Father Capon, he thinks that this religious leader, this expert in the law, is being pretty snarky and trying to trick Jesus. Peterson thinks he's just asking a genuine question and wondering about, well, what does this really mean? Say some more to me. And the reason I'm pausing there is that's one of the beautiful things about stories like this. Neither one is right or wrong. I think it tends to hit us on where we are in life and what you're experiencing. That's one of the beauties of these stories. I said it when I introduced this idea on Sunday about this topic we were doing at the 9 o'clock service. I said, you hear, like, for example, the story of the prodigal son. How I heard the story of the prodigal son when I was 12 and wanted all my dad's money so I could run away. I hear it differently when I'm 57. And then in between different stages in my life, I've heard it differently. That's one of the beauty the beauty of this story. But wanting to vindicate himself, he asked Jesus, "Who's my neighbor?" And Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho." Anybody made that trip either way, from Jerusalem to Jericho? A couple of you folks have, or Julie has, from Jericho up to Jerusalem. I think it's about 2,500 feet in elevation. And you would literally go from below sea level. Jericho is about 80 feet below sea level, maybe a little more than that, on your way up to Jerusalem. The road now, it's like a 4-lane highway. It's fine. But in antiquity, it was a narrow, winding road, and there are plenty of places for a thief to hide out and jump you. And going down was just as exhausting as going up. Have you ever climbed a mountain and then gone downhill? My knees hurt on the way up. My knees were killing me on the way down. I used to do a lot of hiking in the Rocky Mountains. So it's a difficult, treacherous road. Well, he falls in the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and took off, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came upon him, and when he saw him, he was moved with compassion. Or verse 34. Remember where they are right now? They're in Samaria, or about to go through Samaria. They're in Samaritan territory. Jesus had a couple of hard things to say about Samaritans, and a couple of people come back and said, "Boy, the Samaritans didn't like us." But Jesus also, in this travel narrative, calls out 3 cities in Galilee that were rejecting the message from Jesus. And so it's not just the Samaritans who are rejecting it. So this is a way for Jesus to kind of say, see, look, the Samaritan, he understands what we're trying to share. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, treated them with oil and wine. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "Take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend." Which of these 3? Jesus takes a breath, pauses, asks, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? He said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said, "Go and do likewise." I'll say a little bit about the cry. Well, in fact, I'm going to say it right here. Next slide. Keep going. Next one. The actual Christ figure, this is according to Robert Capon, the actual Christ figure in the story, therefore, is yet another loser. I'll say what he means by that in a moment. Yet another down and outer who, by just lying there in his lostness and proximity to death, is in fact the closest thing to Jesus in the parable. Put it in context. Jesus has set his face toward Jerusalem. Jesus has been telling his disciples, and will tell them, when I get to Jerusalem, it's going to be terrible. The Son of Man will be handed over. My life is in danger. Your lives are in danger. There's an urgency to the news we're sharing. And what Capon argues is that the person who's in the ditch is closest to being the Christ figure in the story. Closest to being the Christ figure in the story because of what's happened to him. He's beaten, he's half dead. He's probably going to die if no one cares for him. Now, there's a couple of religious people who walk by, and we tend to, or at least I've in the past, tended to focus on those two. Isn't it terrible? Here, look at these self-righteous guys who are working for God, and there's somebody beat up, and they don't have time to care for him. I think the emphasis is more on the beat-up guy in the ditch and the Samaritan who stops. And Capon even goes on there and argues that the Samaritan, by basically handing over his American Express card or whatever and saying, you spend all you want, the Samaritan is essentially saying, this is Robert Capon's view, and I like it a lot, I'm dead too. Take all the money I've got, do everything you can, make sure this guy survives. I'll leave everything for you. I'll come back and check on him. If you need more money, I'll bring you more. I got another credit card back at my apartment. And that really what's happening here is we're seeing that in Capon's view is the only way you are resurrected is how? What do you have to be resurrected? Dead. Dead. And it's in our deadness, it's in our deaths or in our recognition of our deaths that resurrection is then set to happen. The only people who've ever been resurrected throughout history, and I believe in the resurrection, the only people who've ever been resurrected were dead first. Well, there's a couple in the Bible. There's Elijah, he's the swing low, sweet chariot guy. The chariot of fire comes down and picks him up and takes him away. There's a couple other stories like that where they didn't apparently have to die. But for the most part, most of us experience new life only after we've lost our lives. And then also look at Jesus on the cross. We're doing this sermon series on Jesus on the cross recently. Think of what it is to be on the cross, to be put to death in Rome by the Romans in the Roman Empire. It's shameful, it's humiliating, it's disgusting, it's horrible, it's bad news for your family because now you are in danger. If somebody in your family is crucified, you are in danger. They might have a cross for you next. That means they're looking at you, they're watching you. Most of I'm sure they're out there, but I've never seen a crucifix with a naked Jesus. It's pretty clear that most of the people who were crucified were done so naked as a way, again, of humiliating them, of just stripping them completely down to nothing. Now, maybe it's good sense that we don't do that, but we lose something. We lose something of the horror of it by not seeing Jesus in that way. What Capon thinks really is what matters is death, and it's there in our death that God does God's best work. I'm trying to find a note that I thought I had in here about Christ figures in the movies. Just pray for Julie is what I should say before I say anything else. When I watch movies, I'm always looking for, is there a Christ figure? Is there a Christ figure? Anybody seen Cool Hand Luke? Raise your hand if you've seen Cool Hand Luke. Those of you who've seen it, who's the Christ figure? Luke, because he's willing to die for his fellow prisoners. It's one of the greatest movies of all time. In fact, it's number one on my list. Another one's high on my list, is kind of a cliche, but I don't care. I love it, is Casablanca. Who's the Christ figure in Casablanca? Humphrey Bogart, yes. What's his name in the movie? Rick. Yeah, Rick, because what does Humphrey Bogart do? He's like, all right. And of course, the ending is the coolest. I think this is the beginning of a wonderful friendship, if you remember the end of that movie. Now you're all going to go home and watch Casablanca. It's such a great movie. I think that's what's happening here with Robert Capon is he wants us to see who the Christ figure is here, and that it's this guy who's been beaten up. All right, now go to the next slide. Peterson divides it into 5 segments. So have your scripture in front of you. Hold on to it for a second. Because this is kind of a helpful way to say it. I'm not sure I buy exactly everything he's saying here, but I like the way it helps us organize our thoughts. So there's a 5-segment conversation. The first segment is right there in verse 25. A Bible scholar asks, what must I do to inherit eternal life? That's the first segment. The second one is Jesus' question. He answers Jesus' question, which is a summary of the law. In verse 27, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. The third segment then goes to verse 29, where the Bible scholar keeps pushing. How do you define neighbor? By the way, is that kind of a question today? In the United States of America? Are we talking about who our neighbor is? What does neighbor mean? I really, 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 really would love to be a theological advisor to anyone who is in leadership of our country. Because when we talk about neighbor as people of faith, who is not our neighbor? Who's not our neighbor? Yeah, there's no one. There's no one. So what we start, at least we followers of Jesus, start with what Jesus instructs. And I said this in a sermon a few Sundays ago. There's no way that I think these kinds of teachings from 2,000 years ago or from the Old Testament, where there's a lot of talk about the immigrant and the stranger and the foreigner and all of that, none of it lies exactly perfectly over our system of government and our way of being in the world today. But can we start with, is what I said in the sermon, can we start with the idea that everyone is our neighbor? And now let's talk about, how do we manage that? What kind of boundaries and guidelines and understandings do we need to put around that to make sure people are safe and all those kinds of things as well? So I love that the Bible scholar pushes Jesus on that. And then the fourth segment then is the Bible scholar answers his own question, the man who showed him mercy. And then Jesus finishes with the fifth section is Jesus' story of the Samaritan. And then I love this last part, number 5. The leading word hovering silently in the story is love. There's nowhere that Jesus says anything about love at the end itself. It's there at the beginning, but in the story that he tells, it's hovering in the story. And one of the things that Peterson says at this point too is you can find love in the Bible as a noun from beginning to end. But when love is its most powerful in the Bible, it's functioning as a verb. It's best. The Bible's at its best when love springs into action as a verb. All right, now here's a question for you. Go to the next slide. We'll talk about this around our tables. Jesus says, what did he say at the end of it? The one who showed him mercy. Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. So, there's no right or wrong answer to this. I have one I think is mostly right, but I want to hear from you all. But first talk to each other. Did the Bible scholar go and do? Why or why not? I've got lots of stuff to say about that, but I want you to talk to each other right now. And then also, if you got time, we'll take about 5 or 6 minutes. If you've got time, what about you? If you heard a story like this with Jesus and you were on the road and you're just taking a pause along the way, maybe having a little wine at the end of the day, what about you? Would you be inspired to go and do as well? All right, start with the first one. Did the Bible scholar go and do? If you say yes, why? If you say no, why not? Go. All right, good conversations going on around the tables. Really good. I can just tell from the hum and the buzz in the room. You're getting into it. Somebody who would like to speak for yourself, not for anybody else in your room, in your circle, speak for yourself. How many? Well, let's just say, how many of you think the Bible scholar went and did? How many of you think he didn't? How many of you aren't sure? Yeah, that's a fair answer. Somebody who'd like to share your answer, just raise your hand and speak up, please. Rachel. So he probably did, but maybe as he got further away, went back into being more what? I don't want to put words in your mouth. Yeah, okay. All right, good. Please. Okay. Yeah, there was murmuring going on. I'm going to say a little bit about that. Who is this guy really, and who is he? And so it seems as though this expert in the law is the one who then comes to challenge him. And that's where some folks would say, oh yeah, it's a challenge. He's trying to trap Jesus. Other people would say, no, he's a genuine searcher who wants to learn more. And like I said, I got two scholars right here who have those different viewpoints from that. Yeah. So please. Okay. Sure. Ah, okay. So did y'all hear back there in the corner? So what Larry's saying is maybe it's on a kind of on a continuum. Maybe he was challenging him, but he also, in hearing the answer, began to move a little more towards, oh, maybe I need to change the way I think and see and understand. Am I more or less close? Jesus had major impact on the people. Yeah. Okay. So maybe kind of both and is maybe he started out as, who do you think you really are? Do you realize I went to Yale and whatever? And Jesus is like, yeah, I went to a Bible college. Interesting answer. Somebody else. What'd you think? Lisa. You don't think he did? Okay. So yeah, he's self-absorbed, narrow-minded. He didn't win, but that didn't really change him at all. Okay, that's a legitimate answer. Alan, please. Yeah, right. So that's a nice sermon, Jesus, but I'm going to go home and watch the ball game. Yeah. All right. Right, yeah, exactly. All right, good. Let's get to the next one then. The parable of the prodigal and his brother as one of the titles. So as I said, the story is I want my father dead. That's sort of my version of what I was picking up from mostly from Robert Capon, not from Eugene Peterson until at Slant. Next slide. Here's some other possible titles. The parable of the prodigal son, the parable of death. We're going to talk about the deaths that happen in here in this story. The parable of the loving father, which is a pretty good title. The parable of the lost sons, plural. Notice that, plural. And then another one that's not in there, but it's at the top of your sheet. The parable of the prodigal and his brother, which that comes out from the headings. That's not in the Bible. That's a heading that you'll find in a Bible. It's not part of the original story. That's the heading that the New Revised Standard Version gives it, which I think is a terrible title. But they didn't ask me in advance. All right, let's read it. Then Jesus said, there was a man who had two sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the wealth that will belong to me. So he divided his assets between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant region, and there he squandered his wealth in dissolute living. It was Jerusalem Vegas was the name of the town. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that region, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of the region who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I've sinned against you. I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. So pause there for a moment. Do you notice he's still scheming? I mean, is he really remorseful? Is he really confessional? Or is he just scheming a way to get some food? In my view, and again, that's a beautiful part about these stories, is your interpretation is every bit as solid as mine. In my view, he's scheming. He schemed before to get his money to go to Jerusalem, Vegas, and blow it all. and now he's just coming up with another scheme. Or maybe you've got a different interpretation, which is okay. Verse 20. So he set off and went to his father. And here's my favorite part in the whole story. While he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Do you notice what happens here? What has the father heard up to this point? Zero. He's not heard anything about being a slave, being a servant, being a hired hand, getting a good meal every day. I'm so sorry, I've messed up. None of that. He sees him, he runs to him, he holds him, he kisses him. Then the son, this is why I think he's a schemer, he can't quite realize what his dad is doing, what his father's doing. So he just goes into scheme mode. Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Notice this. Does the father respond to that? No. But the father said to his slaves, quickly, notice the father says nothing to the confession. Zero, zip, nada. Oh, it's great. Don't worry about it. Not even that. He says to the slaves, quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet and get the fatted calf and kill it. Which, by the way, the fatted calf is going, what did I do? And let us eat, and I'll get back to the fatted calf, as a matter of fact. Let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. The son was what? Dead. The son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. They began to celebrate. Now, Mr. Self-Righteous, I've worked so hard for the family all my life. Father, you do not, I'm such a perfect guy compared to that slob of a son that you've got. His elder son was in the field and he came and approached the house. He heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. And he replied, your brother has come. Your father has killed the fatted calf because he got him back safe and sound. Then he, the older son, became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered, Father, listen, for all notice the tone. Again, it's open to interpretation. I don't think his tone is, well, Dad, listen, let me say some things. I think he's like, listen. He's almost treating his father in the same way his brother did. For all these years, I've been working like a slave for you, and I've never disobeyed your command. Yet you've never even given me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your assets with prostitutes, by the way, do we know from the story if he spent money on prostitutes? We have no idea. Older son's assuming. Robert Capon says, we're getting into, I mean, this might sound kind of edgy, but that's Robert Capon, who was always edgy. We're getting maybe into the older son's fantasy life here that may not necessarily have anything to do with what the younger son went and did. And which, by the way, there's a ton of biblical scholarship from Eurocentric countries like the United States of America and many European countries where they look at, like, for example, Mary Magdalene, and they say, ooh, I think she was a prostitute. Or they look at the woman at the well and they say, ooh, she was a loose woman. There's a ton of that you may have heard growing up. It's really, really bad when you run into that sort of theology. Just, that's male-centric theology that needs to shift. And so verse 30, when the son of yours came back, who has devoured your assets of prostitutes, you filled the fatted calf for him. Then the father said to him, son, you're always with me. All that is mine is yours. Dad's saying, I'm already dead. I'm already dead. It's yours. You want it, it's yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found. Go to the next one. The sin of self-righteousness is on display here. And here's something I want to say that's going to sound harsh, but I'm going to say it anyway. I can get fairly direct in the pulpit about some of the self-righteous behavior that Julie and I experienced growing up in very fundamentalist churches. Just finger-pointing, shaming. If you've had a lustful thought, you're in trouble. I don't know anybody between 12 and death who doesn't have. Thank you very much for the applause, yes. You can quote me on Facebook. I don't know anybody between 12 and death who hasn't had a lustful thought. Remember Jimmy Carter interviewed in Playboy in 1976 or 75, somewhere like that? I remember one of our teachers in Sunday school or someplace telling us how horrible it was that this candidate for the President of the United States would be interviewed by such a terrible magazine. maybe it wasn't the best choice in the world. On the other hand, did you read the article? No one's going to raise their hand. Like, I did. I read the article. A friend of mine happened to have a copy. And he talks about his life and his sincere faith, and he confesses some of his weaknesses, and it's a beautiful statement of a man with sincere, deeply humble Christian faith. Maybe it wasn't the best place to put it there. On the other hand, who is Jesus accused of by the self-righteous people in the Gospels of hanging out with all the time? Drunkards, prostitutes, tax collectors. So is there anywhere the gospel is not going to be welcome? Now, let me say this. Sometimes, those of us in more progressive churches can commit the sin of self-righteousness just as much. Look at us. And I'm just talking about myself now. We don't think like those people. Look at us. We drink wine openly, unlike the Baptists who only drink it one person at a time. Look at us and how, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I heard someone once say, I'm so glad I grew up in a church that doesn't have theological problems. Yeah, yeah. Kitty says, which church is that? Yeah, it's a really good question because there isn't one. There isn't one. Just because you're of a particular persuasion, and I love our open theology, I love who we are, but that doesn't mean me, aren't in danger of becoming self-righteous. I think it's important to point that out. And here's the other part, too, that's fascinating. The older brother thinks that what's going to get him in good shape with God is his moralism. Look at me. Look at how great I am. Look at how hard I work. Look at all the wonderful things I've done. And Dad is like, of course I love you. Everything. And Capon even takes it farther. It basically says, as the older son, he probably would have been in charge of everything. And instead of having like 19 fatted calves that they can use to celebrate throughout the year, they've only got one. And the elder brother is so stiff and so narrow-minded and so self-righteous, we're just going to keep this one lamb. And now the dad has taken the one lamb and celebrated his brother who's come, which is a perfect lesson of stinginess and a lack of gratitude and a lack of faith and a lack of a whole lot of other things. I wanted to share this quote for you from Robert directly. I wish he was still alive. If you all had ever met him, you would just love him. You might disagree with him tremendously, and he loves that too. He says, look, we're all dead. We're all dead here, and we're having a terrific time. This is the father talking to the older son. We're all dead here, and we're having a terrific time. We're all lost here, and we feel right at home. You, on the other hand, Mr. Self-Righteous, are alive and miserable. And worse yet, you're standing out here in the yard as if you were some kind of beggar. Why can't you see you own this place? Now, shut up. Forget about your stupid life. Go inside and pour yourself a drink. Thank you, Larry. I just love that. Now, shut up. Forget about your stupid life. Go inside and pour yourself a drink. In other words, enjoy the party. Get involved with the celebration that's going on. Next one. Now, note the deaths in the story. The father, remember? I wish you were dead, Dad. I want your money. Fine, here. I'll give up my life, essentially, metaphorically. The prodigal essentially is dead. He's in a pigsty. I mean, for him being a Hebrew person, he is in hell. He's dead. He has nothing. The fatted calves. The fatted calf has done nothing wrong other than just get fatted up. The older son, he's dead and doesn't know it. He's dead and doesn't know it. So there's really 4 deaths in the story. Where's the Jesus? Where's the Christ figure? The fatted calf. The fatted calf is completely innocent, has done nothing wrong, is taken and killed. There is the Christ figure in the story. And one of the things, the fatted calf plays a role. Say more. Yes. Yes, the fatted calf is being sacrificed, has been put to death, and it's because of the death that they can have a party, that they can celebrate. We got to know Robert so well. Julie and I were able to hire him on a retreat once, and with 6 of my buddies from seminary, we were the not ready for primetime ministers. Do you recognize that from Saturday Night Live, the not ready for primetime players? And Robert and his wife came and spent a weekend with us in a condo in North Carolina somewhere, I forget. And he read from one of his books to us, and he was so much fun to talk to, and such an amazing person. But one of the things he says is that, I said this before, I just want to reiterate it. Death is the only requirement for resurrection. And what he says is, when you die and you find out that that's all you needed to do in order to be resurrected and participate in heaven, if you don't like that, you know what you can do? Go to hell. I mean, that's basically what Robert says. And we think about this. We got into a little nerdy conversation among the clergy the other day about, if you get to hell and if you get to heaven and you can't stand that there's Mormons and Baptists and Muslims and Hindus and atheists and other people there, what's it going to feel like to you? You're in hell. Do you know the story from C.S. Lewis, the Chronicles of Narnia, when there's a war raging, between Aslan and the White Witch and all that, and there's I think they're dwarves, the dwarves who are they're trying to figure out which side should we fight on. They can't quite figure it out, and they go and hide in a little shelter, right? Am I telling the story right? And they get in there and they're hiding. Aslan wins. Narnia is back to beautiful, wonderful, amazing. It's paradise. I mean, you get it. It's heaven, right? The little dwarves are hiding, and they're told, "Look, it's okay. It's safe. You can come out now. The shelter you were hiding in is gone. Aslan has won. We're in paradise." And what do they say? "Oh, how do we know it's a trick? Not a trick. If we stand up, we're going to bump our head. You're just telling us it's gone, but it could still be there." Where are they? They're in heaven, but it's hellish. Anyway, all right. A couple more things. Next slide. So this is a big deal. And here's a place where Capon and Peterson line up. We cannot create righteousness by our activities or our moralisms, but must continuously re-enter what Kierkegaard called the preparing power of chaos, what John the Cross called the dark night of the soul, and an anonymous English writer named the child of unknowing. There's 3 beautiful quotes right there if you're looking for something for your Christmas card. We must continue. Yeah, I know, yeah. That was meant to be silly. But hear it again, though. We must continuously re-enter what Kierkegaard called the preparing power of chaos. I put a couple of images up here for you. These are 2 ideas of how time travels. Most of us tend to think that time travels like this. And then something along here happens. Let's say you get married. For me, that was June 23rd, right? Yeah. 1979, when Julie was 6 years old. It was an arranged marriage. So we tend to think of, okay, I got married on June 23rd, 1979, and then we had a little apartment, then we didn't like that apartment, then we moved out, and then we had some other things, et cetera, et cetera, had babies along the way. William Bridges, who's a very good person who helps corporations deal with change, says that change happens like this. So Glen and Julie get married here on June 23rd, 1979, and all of a sudden, everything is what? Sometimes this is called the chaotic circle. But when the change happens, this is where the elder brother is. And what does the elder brother want to do? He wants to go back to the way things used to be. And think of your lives. Think what's the biblical story that this reflects? Anybody know? Who? What? Creation? Kinda, but no. The Exodus. Let my people go. We're free, we're free. It's hot. We're running out of water. We don't have food. At least in Egypt, we had a roof over our heads. The Hebrew people just whining and whining and whining. The elder brother wants to go back. And so it's in those chaotic moments when the changes and the growth opportunities are happening. This happens in everyone. This is the way everyone functions. Almost what Bridges argues is that all of us change, and we think it's just, the next thing, and we actually go down in. And so life is a series of these loops. Some of them smaller, some of them larger. But it's here where the learning happens. And in fact, Larry's on the visioning team that we formed about what we're going to do next with South Campus. We have the South Campus assessment report in front of us, but we're putting what did I say? We're putting flesh and bones on their basic assessment. Well, now we're a little bit in chaos. Well, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? And it's all good. I love it personally. I love being in this. Sometimes it can be a tough place to be. All right, next one real quick. The classic parable of grace proclaims clearly, that's the one we just looked at, clearly that grace operates only by the raising of the dead. Those who think they can make their lives the basis of their acceptance by God need not apply. That should be under things that make you go, What's he saying there? Those who think they can make their lives the basis of their acceptance by God need not apply. Say what? Well, the older son is wrong, yes. What about you? I'm not picking on you, Alan, but what about us? What's that say to us? Grace is free, you can't buy it. What I hear over here? Your works won't do it. Your good looks won't do it. Well, I'm talking to you, Steve. Your success in life won't do it. Your perfect 3.2 grandchildren who are just wonderful won't do it. What is it that does it? You got to die. And it doesn't mean you. What it means is you die to all that stuff. What is it David Brooks talks about? There's our resume work when we're trying to build our career. And then once our career is done or getting closer to being done, we start writing our what? Our obituaries. We start writing our legacy. Who are we? What have we accomplished? What mattered in our lives? And that we begin to see as we go through life. I'm assuming I'm telling things that you already know. As we go through life, we begin to worry less and less and less about the resume stuff. And more about who am I? What have I done? Who have I loved? Who loves me? What difference have I made in the world? All right, so next week we're going to look at Luke 16, 19 through 31. The title I'm giving to that one is The Invisible Man. Luke 16, 19 through 31. You won't find these titles in your Bibles. Luke 16, 19 through 31, The Invisible Man. The second one is Luke 18, 9 through 14. And the title of that one is The Sinners, plural. The Sinners, plural. So Luke 16, 19 through 31. Luke 18, 9 through 14. It's 7:01. It's time to go. Good night, everybody. Thank you all.